Bruce, can you tell us, when did you and your wife first start to notice something perhaps a little different about Cliff, your son?
Well, the differences weren't exactly noticeable to us at the beginning. In fact, I've realized in retrospect there's an interesting thing that happens. One of the things that characterizes autism, for example, is perseverative behaviors. You hear about children that spin or flap their hands. With Cliff, it was opening and closing doors, and it was organizing his toy cars. And he would do this over and over and over. And as our first child and an only child, we really had nothing to compare to. But the natural reaction was to say, well, look at the focus. You know, the kid can really concentrate. That's there's no ADHD there. He's really on task. But when the early intervention people explained to us what the normal attention span for a 2-year-old ought to be, and it was considerably less than the length of time Cliff was spending doing some of these things, that's really when we realized something was off.
So what age was that? And then what sort of was the tipping point that made you and your wife go and seek help?
Well, that would have been probably at age between 2 and 2.5. There's actually something called the 18-month screen, which is a number of milestone markers that children should have reached at approximately 18 months to 2 years of age. And Cliff hadn't met a number of those. He wasn't conversing. He wasn't speaking with intentional speech. A lot of what was coming out of him was what they call echolalia, which was repeating things that he'd heard from others. He wasn't interacting with his peers in play. The perseverative behaviors I mentioned, these and other things were the so-called red flags. And then there was a series of tests and examinations to be done, assessments, to eliminate other possibilities such as hearing loss. But at the end of the road, right around his 3rd birthday, the conclusion from the developmental team came back that yes, in fact, our boy had autism.
What would you say are the main ways that diagnosis has changed your family life?
Wow. I can't think of anything that it hasn't changed. The amount of work that we have had to put into learning about autism and how to deal with it, how to help Cliff cope, how to help him learn, because he learns very differently from other kids. The amount of effort that we've had to put into implementing that knowledge for him. Certainly the amount of money that we've had to spend doing that. We very nearly went bankrupt spending money out of our own pocket while we were waiting on the list for government support. The amount of time that we've had to spend advocating for him with government and school services. Cliff has a service dog. We spent time and energy applying for that support for him, and I had to spend a week in Oakville at the Lions Foundation Training Center 24/7 learning how to be the dog's handler. I really can't think of an aspect of our lives that has not been affected by it, because there's no aspect of Cliff's life that isn't affected by it. He is a very different person from most people that you will meet. He's wired up differently. And that's a 24/7 reality for him, and it's a 24/7 effort for the rest of us to help him with that.
When you look back at what, every parent would probably ask themselves this question: is there anything that we could have done differently? There's going to be parents watching this interview that may have some of the similar questions and sort of things that you guys went through when you talk about, we thought it was different. It was our first experience, our first child. We had nothing to compare to. There's lots of parents out there like that. There are parents who get really fixated on milestones and, whether they don't do all 25 things on the list, then it's a cause for concern. But when you look back on it, because now you've been dealing with this for 13 years, is there anything else that you would have done differently or questioned?
I think I would not be so resistant to the notion of medication. That's one thing that we wrestled with, that idea of doing that for Cliff. I think we wrestled with it for quite a bit longer than we needed to, certainly longer than we should have, considering the ultimate benefit of it. I think we should, I'm not sure that we spent too much time, but I think we shouldn't have wasted time with some of the pseudoscience that's out there. There's some pretty solid research about what works for kids with autism. It's been well studied, peer reviewed, published all over the world. We know what works. But there are all sorts of theory, not even theories, just ideas, hunches about diet, and oh good heavens, I've heard about hyperbaric oxygen and swimming with dolphins. There's absolutely no proof for those things, not a shred of it. We looked around at some of those notions and ultimately rejected them, but in retrospect, I regret just having wasted that time, frankly.
So we're going to fast forward a bit. Cliff is now 13, so you've been dealing with this autism diagnosis for 10 years. Can you take us through what a typical day is like in your family?
As routine, predictable, and as structured as we can possibly make it. Cliff gets up and does the same things in the same order at approximately the same times every morning. He has about 30 to 40 minutes before he gets up 30 to 40 minutes before the taxi arrives to take him to a school. He's not in a mainstream school. He's in what's known as a Section 23 classroom, where behavioral supports are provided by Carrie's Place, which is a local agency that supports children with autism. The teaching staff is provided by the school board, of course, but it's a much more intensive setting, and he gets one-to-one support to make his way through that day. But he has to get up, get dressed, get his morning meds, have his breakfast, brush his teeth and hair, and be off to the front door by 8:25 when the taxi shows up and it takes him to school. He's had the same driver, a wonderful fellow named Rayhan, for almost 2.5 years now. The school day is he's in a modified program. He's doing work at his grade level, and I think that's an important thing to remember. There's a misconception that autism involves some sort of intellectual delay, and it's often called a developmental disorder, and the inference is drawn that has something to do with learning ability. By definition, it is not. Some children with autism do have other disorders, and there may be an intellectual deficit, but that does not necessarily go along with the autism. My son taught himself to read He learned addition and subtraction all by himself. His mother felt kind of ripped off by that because she's a high school teacher, and she always said when we were planning on having children that teaching a child to read would be one of the most wonderful gifts that she could imagine giving. Well, Cliffy picked it up on his own. He figured it out. He's very, very smart, but the way that he learns is very, very different from other kids. And there is a lot of rote learning. He is a highly hands-on, practical learner. The theoretical stuff that would leap off the blackboard and make sense for the rest of us doesn't work for him. He's got to get firsthand experience with it. He's got to touch it. He's got to get involved with it in order for it to land in his brain. Mind you, when it does, it never leaves. His memory is phenomenal. So that's a little bit about school. I can talk more about that if
well,
you'd like.
and I wanted to sort of paint a picture of what you're dealing with, because is it predictable, his behavior when he comes home? You know, what sets off a potential meltdown, and sort of take us through one of those episodes as they occur.
Well, meltdowns usually arise either out of ongoing anxieties that he is unable to control, or from unexpected changes in that expected schedule or routine or order of events. The difficulties we've been having lately, and I think that's just because he's grown so quickly, and I think the medication as a result is having less of an effect at its current dosages. But the problems that he's having lately are arising out of things that we know he's managed to learn how to do. For example, the last time that he was taken to hospital after he assaulted his mom, he had left his sunglasses on a table in the food court, and when they went back to get them, they weren't there. He's been through that process before of retracing his steps, perhaps asking shopkeepers or people in the area if they've seen whatever he's lost. And he's been through it in both ways, both finding the thing that he lost, and that resolves the issue and gets him back on track. He's also had the experience of not finding it and being told, well, you know, it's just a thing, Cliff. No one has been hurt here. We'll just go back to the store and get another one. And he's gone through that process and it's worked out all right. This time it didn't, and it really didn't. And so it's these kinds of concerns, that things that we felt that he had mastered aren't going as well, and they're leading to much more serious outbursts.